what is a biblical role? Like, does a wife have a role? Does a husband have a role? What does God say about these roles? And are they really important to bringing good health to your marriage? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Stay tuned.
You don't want to miss it. You're listening to Marriage Mania, where we are audacious, sagacious, and tenacious for the Lord to uphold godly marriages and to raise fervent children who are countercultural and stand for biblical truth.
Welcome back. I'm Tania.
And I'm Michael.
And today we're going to get into it and talk about biblical roles. We've been talking about the establishment of a biblical foundation in marriage. And if you've been listening to our podcast, the previous podcast, we just talked about having biblical priorities, but we've already gone through just an overview of setting a biblical foundation and being on mission and having biblical priorities. And today we want to talk about roles. What are biblical roles and what does God have to say about these biblical roles? But before we get started, please subscribe here. It helps us to get the message out. We truly want to reach as many families as possible. We also have a conflict book. It's called the Conflict Manual, and it talks about the different ways and different techniques to really address conflict and communication and disagreements in marriage. And there are about 10 different conflict styles, and we have over 50 conflict resolution techniques. And so check that out. It's available on Amazon. And I've been talking about biblical roles for a while and talking about the covering the role of biblical husband and the helper, the role of biblical wife. But today we're going to really quickly kind of talk about that from a foundational perspective, as we're talking about building out a foundation, a biblical foundation for marriage. So today we're going to be talking about these biblical roles. Are they really important? And I think so. I think they're critical. Obviously, God had a lot to say about them, especially if we go back to the book of Genesis 2:18, where God established a helper for Adam. And then he also talked about this in Ephesians. So Michael, let's talk a little bit about these important and critical roles that we have in marriage.
Yes, and the Bible is pretty clear on these biblical roles and very straightforward language, but our culture has completely confused everybody with this. It's like, what exactly is our biblical roles?
There's a trend out there right now with the traditional wife and all these things, talking about these roles. Yeah.
Right. So there's a movement back towards, hey, maybe God did put us here for particular reasons, and maybe we are a little different than each other. We're not the same. If we're the same, one of us is not necessary, that we are different. There are different commands in the Bible. And so there's that trend, counter trend back. I don't know how big of a movement it is, but there seems to be a trend out there, but there's definitely been a trend in our culture of confusion, of maybe we're all just the same. There's this egalitarian, complementarian debate out there in the world, and even in the Christian community. The egalitarian view says that men and women are the same in every way. There's differences between people. There's no real distinguishable difference between men and women. The complementarian view says God created men and women very different. There are very distinguishable differences between men and women. We have very distinct physical differences, and we also have very distinct differences in how we see the world. We have different worldviews. We have different cultures, if you will. And in the Bible, we have very different roles and commands from God in order to complement each other. We're of equal worth, but we have very distinguishable differences. And, we hold the complementarian position as the only real biblical position. You have to ignore the Bible or twist it to make it say what you want it to say in order to come to an egalitarian conclusion that God didn't create men and women, husbands and wives, to be different. There are very specific commands for wives and husbands that are very different. A set of commands for husbands and a set of commands for wives. God doesn't say, husbands and wives, love and respect each other, submit to one another, co-lead your family, treat each other with understanding. He doesn't say that. He tells believers to treat each other in certain ways, which we can apply to our marriage too. But when it comes to husbands and wives, God very specifically says, wives, do this. Husbands, do that.
Mhm.
And they are very different commands in Ephesians 5, Colossians 3, 1 Peter 3. In very straightforward language, God says that husbands are the leaders, the head of their wives and families. They are to lead their families as Christ leads the church, which is a very sacrificial love,
Yeah.
doing what's best for his wife and family. Husbands are to protect and provide. Agape love their wives, which is a very sacrificial servant love that gives, doesn't seek its own purposes. They are to live with their wives with understanding, not to be harsh with them, treat their emotions delicately. And wives are to submit to their husband's leadership. The word in the Greek is hupotasso, which means to bring themselves under the authority of their husbands. They are to respect their husbands. Phileo love their husbands, which is a friendship, brotherly, sisterly love. In other words, be kind to them. And when we do this, the wife is a picture of the church, and the husband is a picture of Jesus, the head of the church. That's how God designed it.
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing because it's what God created. He designed marriage. He made this for us to be able to live life together. And if we're doing this the best we can with God's help, then our marriages flourish. Our marriages become very healthy because we're honoring one another in our roles. And we all have, we have different roles. And, I don't want your role. And I'm sure you don't want my role.
Why don't we just switch for a couple of days?
Yeah, I don't think so. It's
a better understanding of each other's roles.
Well, I mean, that actually brings a good point because that's why we wrote these Bible studies, and I'll just show them here. We've got the helper, the role of a biblical wife, and then we've got the covering the role of a biblical husband. And these Bible studies actually talk about the roles that we have in marriage and the importance and what God says about them. And when we don't do them, it just gets us off track and it causes us to not respect and honor each other's roles. And then we have conflict. And then it just causes a ripple effect. And then we tend to kind of go our own ways. And if you're not addressing these things, then, your marriage tends to drift. And so it is so important to understand those roles. And we have those Bible studies available. We talked a little bit about the foundations of a biblical marriage course, but we also went deeper with the Bible studies.
Yes, I like what you said there. God's way of doing things is best. We want to follow God's ways because we know that's the best way to do things. He designed this world. He designed marriage. He knows how all of it works. And, if we are wrestling with this, there are things that we all wrestle with in the Bible, but we need to wrestle with them and ask God for wisdom and understanding and work to align my view with the Bible, not ignore the hard truths or twist the hard truths to be in line with my views. Being outside of God's will is just not a good place to be, and man has been rationalizing his own way forever to make his own way seem right. If I want an egalitarian view, I'll just make the Bible say that. I'll ignore the very clear language that speaks to wives to do this and husbands to do that with very different commands, and just say the Bible gives commands for both husbands and wives to co-lead and submit to one another and love and respect one another and so on. I'll just make the Bible a document that changes with the culture. We shouldn't do that. It's just so important that we do marriage God's way.
Yes, and I love that. So if you want to take this course, it's called The Biblical Foundations of Marriage. It is available at marriagemaniaministry.com, and it goes through the different outlines that talk about the biblical foundation, being on mission, setting priorities, what the purpose of marriage is, a biblical role, setting a godly legacy. All of these things are available. And it is just such a blessing to be able to share and talk about these things. And so with the biblical role, you also have the opportunity to get the Bible study to go even deeper. And so those are also available at marriagemaniaministry.com. And we are just so thrilled by these Bible studies. I mean, they have just been such a blessing to many people. And so we encourage you to take that if this is something that is on your heart, and also if you're interested in taking the course. So if you want to know more about the biblical role of a wife, check out this next video.